The royal reception had been designed to present unity. Instead, one sentence shattered the illusion. With senior family members standing only feet away, Queen Camilla made a cold remark questioning whether Princess Charlotte truly belonged in such a prominent position. Catherine heard every word. She did not argue, raise her voice, or create a spectacle. She simply crossed the room, took her daughter by the hand, and removed her from the event. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine had entered St. James's Palace, determined to give Charlotte confidence. The royal residence, used for family gatherings, had been chosen for a youth reception, bringing charities, diplomats, and household representatives together. Charlotte's place beside George mattered because the children were meant to represent continuity, duty, and the monarchy's next generation without turning childhood into a contest. Camilla watched the young princess receive attention, then allowed irritation to sharpen her voice. She is being given too much importance for someone who will never wear the crown, the queen consort said, presenting the insult as a joke about succession. The crown meant the sovereign role inherited by the monarch, but Catherine understood that no constitutional explanation could excuse humiliating a child before the room. Charlotte changed. Her smile disappeared, her shoulders tightened, and the excitement she had carried into the reception collapsed into embarrassment. Catherine saw that her daughter had understood every word. She also saw the deeper danger. A young girl learning that service, loyalty, and effort could still be dismissed because her brother stood closer to the throne. William remained motionless for several seconds. The prince wanted to defend Charlotte at once, yet he knew that confronting his father's wife before guests could turn a family wound into a national spectacle. His silence was not weakness. It was the final restraint before anger took control. Catherine made the decision for them both. She moved to Charlotte, bent close, and said, "You are coming with me." The princess took her daughter's hand and walked toward the side doorway. No announcement followed. No permission was requested. The simple act carried more force than any argument. Camilla refused to apologize. She insisted her words concerned constitutional reality rather than Charlotte personally, but that defense only deepened Catherine's fury. A child had been wounded, and the queen consort was debating definitions. The door closed behind mother and daughter. William turned toward Camilla, his expression stripped of ceremony. Catherine had removed Charlotte from the room, but she could not remove the words her daughter had already heard, or the rivalry those words had exposed. Behind the polished titles were three people trapped in an intensely personal moment. Charlotte was not thinking about succession law or palace hierarchy. She was wondering why an adult had embarrassed her in front of a room full of strangers. Catherine was no longer acting as a future queen. She was acting as a mother. And Camilla, convinced she had merely spoken an uncomfortable truth, failed to understand how deeply she had wounded them both. Catherine closed the sitting room door and turned toward her daughter. Charlotte had been given carefully chosen public duties so she could learn service without feeling that childhood had become a performance. Those appearances mattered because they helped her understand responsibility beside George, while still allowing her to remain a child, away from royal pressure. Charlotte looked up and asked the question Catherine had feared. "Did I do something wrong by standing beside George?" The words struck harder than Camilla's remark. For several seconds, the princess could not answer. She had expected anger, perhaps tears, but not guilt. The young girl had begun blaming herself for another adult's cruelty. Catherine moved closer and held both of Charlotte's hands. She told her that another person's bitterness could never decide her value or her place in the family. The mother spoke slowly, because every word mattered. She wanted her daughter to understand that standing beside her brother was not an act of ambition. It was simply part of serving together. William entered after confronting senior aides outside the room. The prince expected to find Charlotte crying, yet she sat rigidly, fighting for the composure expected of a princess. That restraint broke something inside him. He realized she was already learning to hide pain for the sake of royal dignity, and he hated that lesson. Camilla, meanwhile, spoke privately with Charles and insisted Catherine had deliberately overreacted. The queen consort claimed the withdrawal had been designed to make her appear cruel and weaken her authority. The king listened without interruption, but the argument exposed something deeper. She viewed the moment as a political challenge, while Catherine viewed it as a wound inflicted on her child. William returned to the question of why the remark had sounded so deliberate. An aide then admitted that Camilla had raised concerns about Charlotte's growing visibility before. She had questioned why the young princess stood so close to George at earlier engagements, and whether the public was being encouraged to see them as equals. Catherine heard the admission and went still. This was not a careless sentence. It was a pattern. The remark at St. James's Palace had sounded spontaneous, but its roots reached back to a previous ceremony, where the first warning had been impossible to ignore. The palace had seen the danger months earlier, and quietly buried it. During a rehearsal for the Commonwealth service, Camilla had objected to Charlotte walking directly behind George, arguing that the young princess was being positioned as though she were equal to the heir. Catherine heard the protest from the adjoining corridor. No cameras captured what followed, but the exchange became the hidden trigger behind everything that erupted at St. James's Palace. Charlotte had been placed beside George for a short procession involving the younger royals. The Commonwealth service was a formal gathering, celebrating the nations linked through the Commonwealth. And the rehearsal mattered, because every position suggested rank, unity, and future responsibility. For the young princess, however, it was meant to be a simple lesson in service beside her brother. Camilla questioned the arrangement in front of the master of the household, the senior official responsible for organizing major royal events. The queen consort argued that too much attention on Charlotte might confuse the public about the line of succession, which is the legal order deciding who inherits the throne. Her words sounded procedural, but the resentment beneath them was impossible to miss. Catherine entered the rehearsal area before the discussion could continue. The princess kept her voice calm and reminded Camilla that Charlotte was a child serving her family, not a rival campaigning for constitutional power. She refused to let palace language disguise what had happened. A young girl had been reduced to her distance from the crown. Charlotte heard more than anyone realized. Later, she passed two aides discussing whether her place in the procession should be moved farther back. The young princess said nothing, but during the journey home she became unusually quiet. Catherine noticed the change immediately, and that silence stayed with her. William demanded that the original arrangement be restored. The prince made clear that Charlotte would not be publicly pushed aside to satisfy another person's insecurity. Charles, however, asked everyone to avoid a family argument before the service. The king believed calm would protect the monarchy, but his attempt at peace only allowed the hostility to survive. Catherine spoke privately with William that evening. She warned him that if Charlotte were ever publicly diminished again, she would remove their daughter from the engagement without hesitation. The prince understood that this was not an emotional threat. It was a promise. Months later, the remark at St. James's Palace activated that promise. William now knew Catherine had not acted suddenly. She had acted exactly as she said she would. What had once been softened into a scheduling disagreement was now exposed as a pattern, and William was preparing to confront the person at its center. There were no photographers, no advisors, and no carefully drafted statements when William entered the private drawing room. Camilla was already waiting beside the fireplace, convinced that he had come to discuss Catherine's behavior. Instead, the prince closed the door, remained standing, and repeated the exact words she had used about Charlotte. He then asked one devastating question. What did you expect my daughter to feel when she heard that? William had demanded the meeting before anyone left St. James's Palace. The royal residence, often used for formal family business, had become the center of a conflict no staff member could safely manage. Camilla suggested that palace officials remain present to create a written record, but the future king refused. This was not a briefing. It was a father confronting the woman who had humiliated his child. Charles waited in the adjoining room with a senior aide. The king knew every raised voice carried danger, yet he could not decide whether entering would calm the argument or make it worse. He had spent years trying to protect his wife from public hostility. Now that same instinct was pulling him away from his son. Camilla defended herself first. She insisted that she had been protecting proper royal hierarchy, the order that separates the monarch, the heir, and other family members by duty and rank. William replied that hierarchy did not require humiliating an 8-year-old girl before a crowded reception. His voice stayed low, but every word landed hard. Camilla then crossed the line again. She accused Catherine of using Charlotte's popularity to strengthen her own public image. William's control broke. The prince warned her never to question his wife's motives by attacking their daughter. Catherine had protected Charlotte, he said, because nobody else in that room had moved quickly enough. Camilla finally admitted that she had previously asked organizers to reduce the young princess's central appearances. The queen consort claimed those requests were about clarity, not jealousy. But the confession confirmed the Commonwealth rehearsal had never been an isolated incident. William now saw a pattern, and he refused to let her rename it as protocol. Charles entered when the voices rose. The king barely crossed the doorway before his son turned toward him and asked whether he had known about the interference. Silence followed. It lasted only seconds, but it answered everything. William stepped away from them both. He declared that Catherine alone would decide when Charlotte returned to public duty, and no palace official would overrule her. The confrontation ended without an apology, but William's final sentence shifted the balance of power and forced Charles to decide whose authority he would defend. For Charles, the crisis was no longer about a careless sentence. It had become a test of his kingship, his marriage, and his relationship with the son destined to succeed him. Camilla expected protection from the husband who had defended her through decades of public hostility. William expected his father to protect a granddaughter who had done nothing wrong. Alone at his desk, the king faced a truth no royal protocol could soften. Defending one side would wound the other. Charles received the next blow before the room had fully settled. Catherine had cancelled Charlotte's appearance at a second engagement scheduled for the following morning. The decision mattered because it turned a private family dispute into a visible public absence. A royal engagement, meaning an official appearance carried out on behalf of the monarchy, could not be changed without raising questions. Palace advisors warned him that every option carried damage. Forcing Charlotte to return could make Catherine appear powerless and tell the child that palace image mattered more than her pain. Allowing the withdrawal without explanation could make Camilla look responsible. The monarchy depended on control, yet control was already slipping away. Camilla entered determined to stop that collapse. The queen consort told Charles that an apology would validate what she called an exaggerated interpretation of her words. She asked him to defend her publicly and privately, reminding him how often they had survived hostility together. Her appeal was personal, but the pressure beneath it was unmistakable. William arrived later with Charlotte's revised schedule. The prince placed it on the desk and told his father that no royal duty was more important than his daughter's sense of safety. He did not shout. That restraint made the warning heavier. The future king was not asking for permission. He was drawing a line. Charles finally admitted that he had approved earlier efforts to clarify Charlotte's ceremonial positioning. The king claimed he wanted to avoid confusion over rank, not encourage personal humiliation. Yet the distinction offered little comfort. His approval had created space for Camilla's resentment to grow. Charles made his decision. He refused to overrule Catherine and ordered that Charlotte's future appearances require written approval from both parents. That instruction gave William and the princess complete protective control over where their daughter served and who could place her there. Camilla received the decision from her husband himself. She remained silent, but her expression hardened as the meaning became clear. This was not a temporary safeguard. It was a direct reduction of her influence. Charles had attempted to protect his granddaughter without condemning his wife. Yet Camilla understood exactly what had happened. The palace had chosen Catherine's boundary over her authority. The empty place beside George became impossible to ignore. At the following morning's youth charity gathering, organizers removed Charlotte's name only minutes before guests arrived. The young princess remained at home with Catherine, while William attended alone with his eldest son. Camilla entered the venue expecting normal ceremony, but the altered arrangement exposed the consequences of her remark more powerfully than any official accusation could have done. Organizers worked quickly to revise the procession, seating plan, and prepared introductions. The procession was the formal order in which royal family members entered and moved through an event, and even one absence could disturb the entire schedule. Charlotte's withdrawal mattered because the gathering had been designed to present the younger generation as united in service. Catherine stayed at Adelaide Cottage with her daughter. The princess understood that missing one engagement might cause palace embarrassment, but forcing Charlotte to appear would teach a far more dangerous lesson. A child already questioning her place could not be asked to smile for strangers simply to protect the adults who had failed her. George stopped William before they left. He asked whether Charlotte was being punished for walking out of the reception. The prince immediately told his son that she was not being punished. She was being protected. Yet the question unsettled him. 3. Because it proved the conflict had already reached beyond one child and into the bond between brother and sister. Camilla noticed the vacant place as soon as the opening ceremony began. The queen consort tried to remain composed, but every mention of Charlotte's absence seemed to draw attention toward her. Guests spoke softly. Staff avoided her gaze. The silence around the empty seat became its own accusation. Sophie approached during a pause in the program. The trusted confidant told Camilla quietly that the entire crisis could have ended with a sincere apology. She warned that defending rank while ignoring a child's pain would only deepen the fracture. The queen consort refused to bend. She replied that she would not apologize for understanding the crown. Catherine received a private message from Charles later that afternoon. The king expressed regret for what Charlotte had experienced and promised that her parents would control future appearances. Yet he never named Camilla's conduct directly. That omission mattered. Regret without accountability still left the wound open. Charlotte waited until evening before asking to speak with her father alone. William expected questions about the event. What he heard instead changed everything. The palace believed the deepest damage came from the public remark, but Charlotte's private confession revealed that her fear was not about one event, it was about her entire future inside the monarchy. William expected tears. Instead, Charlotte asked him to close the door. With no aides, advisors, or senior royals between them, she explained that Camilla's words had made her fear something larger than embarrassment. She believed the family wanted George, but merely tolerated her. The confession struck the future king harder than the original insult. For the first time, the crisis was no longer about protocol or public positioning. It was about whether his daughter felt she belonged. William sat beside Charlotte, while Catherine remained outside, giving father and daughter the privacy they needed. The prince knew this conversation mattered, because royal children were often expected to understand duty before they fully understood the pressure attached to it. He also knew that one careless sentence could shape how his daughter viewed every future appearance. Charlotte spoke slowly. She said she understood that George would one day become king, but she had believed her own work still mattered. The young princess had never wanted his place. She only wanted to know that standing beside her brother did not make her a problem. Charlotte then admitted that she no longer wanted to attend events where someone might laugh at her for standing in the wrong position. That fear cut through William's restraint. The future king tried to hide his emotion, but his voice changed as he told her that service was not measured by who inherited the throne. It was measured by courage, compassion, and character. Charlotte hesitated before revealing something worse. During the earlier rehearsal, Camilla had privately told her to leave the serious duties to George. The Queen Consort's remark had not been made in front of the whole family, but the child had remembered every word. That private disclosure confirmed the public insult was not the beginning. It was the moment a hidden pattern became impossible to deny. William called Catherine into the room. The princess listened as Charlotte repeated what had happened, and her anger became quieter, not weaker. She and the prince agreed that their daughter would return to public duty only when she chose. They also decided that no return would happen until Camilla acknowledged the harm she had caused directly. Charles received the account through a private conversation with William later that evening. The king understood that silence could no longer protect his marriage or the institution. It had protected only the person refusing responsibility. Charles summoned Camilla for one final meeting. This time, he would not allow the discussion to hide behind hierarchy, schedules, or rank. Charlotte's honesty removed the last excuse protecting the Queen Consort, leaving Charles with one final duty: to demand accountability inside his own marriage. By morning, the family conflict had escaped the palace walls. One image dominated television screens: George standing at the charity gathering with an empty marked position beside him, where Charlotte had been expected. Newspapers did not need access to the private confrontation. The absence told the story. Across Britain, the question was no longer why the young princess had missed an event. It was why a child had been made to feel unwelcome there. Palace Communications issued a brief statement saying Charlotte had withdrawn for family reasons. The communications office, which manages official royal messages, hoped the simple wording would prevent speculation. Instead, it created more suspicion. The phrase sounded controlled, but the empty space beside George made the truth feel painfully human. Broadcasters quickly connected the absence to the tense ending of the previous evening's reception at St. James's Palace. Camilla's conduct became the center of every discussion. Commentators questioned why a child's place at an event had become tied to rank, jealousy, and the private tension surrounding the crown. William watched the coverage without speaking. The prince understood that public support could protect Charlotte, yet it could also turn her pain into a national spectacle. Catherine feared the same thing. The princess wanted her daughter defended, but she did not want sympathy to become another burden the young girl had to carry. Camilla opened the morning newspaper and stopped at the front page. The headline read, "The Empty Place," beneath an image of George standing beside Charlotte's unused position. The Queen Consort stared at it for several seconds. She had insisted the issue concerned order and hierarchy. Britain now saw only the absence of a child. A crowd gathered outside Kensington Palace before midday. Men, women, and families held handwritten signs reading, "Charlotte belongs." The royal residence, long associated with William and Catherine's family, became the center of public sympathy. One simple message captured the national mood more clearly than any palace statement could. Sophie spoke privately with Charles that afternoon. The trusted confidant told the king that the monarchy could not ask the public to respect family duty while refusing to defend a child within its own walls. Charles knew she was right, and his silence became heavier. Camilla finally understood that delay would only deepen the damage. She requested a private meeting with Catherine and Charlotte, without Charles, William, or palace advisors present. The empty place had become a national symbol, but the final judgment would be decided in a quiet room between the woman who caused the wound and the mother who refused to ignore it. There was no audience when Camilla finally faced Catherine and Charlotte. No cameras captured the Queen Consort entering the room without an entourage or rehearsed defense. She sat opposite the young princess and acknowledged that her words had been cruel, unnecessary, and wrong. Yet the apology did not erase what happened. Catherine listened without interruption. then delivered the boundary that would define the monarchy's response. Charlotte would serve because she chose to, never because others permitted her to belong. Camilla had accepted Catherine's condition that the meeting take place privately at Windsor, without Charles, William, or palace officials present. Windsor was not simply a royal home. It was a working residence, where family decisions often carried public consequences. The princess wanted no institutional protection around the conversation. She wanted honesty, responsibility, and direct acknowledgement of what Charlotte had endured. Catherine spoke first. She explained that the dispute had never been about securing a larger role for her daughter or placing her beside George for attention. The princess had acted because Charlotte had been reduced to her position in the line of succession, the legal order determining who inherits the throne. A child's worth, she said, could not be measured by how close she stood to the crown. Camilla lowered her voice and apologized directly to Charlotte. The queen consort admitted that frustration over royal hierarchy had hardened into personal resentment. She had allowed concern about rank to become bitterness toward a young girl who had never challenged her. The admission was painful, but it was finally clear. Charlotte did not forgive her immediately. The young princess said quietly that the remark had made her feel unwanted and afraid of attending future events. Those words forced Camilla to confront the human damage behind the palace argument. This was no longer about ceremony. It was about a child carrying shame she had never deserved. Catherine accepted the apology, but forgiveness came with permanent conditions. She declared that Charlotte's duties would be decided by her parents, that the child would never be used in household power struggles, and that any further disrespect would end joint appearances at once. Camilla agreed without resistance. Charles later confirmed the arrangement during a private family discussion, while William assured Charlotte that returning to public life would happen entirely on her terms. The prince made one promise clear: she would never again be asked to serve where she did not feel safe. Several weeks later, Charlotte chose to attend a small children's charity visit with Catherine. She returned not as George's rival, and not as a decorative royal figure, but as a valued member of her family. The crisis ended not with a royal victory, but with a mother's boundary, and from that moment forward, Princess Charlotte's place would be defined by dignity rather than permission. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.